I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're stepping out of a time machine.
Oh, I love a good time machine scenario. Where are we going?
Well, you aren't going back centuries to some ancient dynasty. You are just dropping right into Taipei in 1987.
Okay, 1987, so big hair, early globalization vibes.
Exactly. At first glance, it feels pretty familiar. You see teenagers in, those slightly oversized school uniforms, and there are cassette tapes playing in the storefronts.
Right, it looks like a normal bustling city.
But then you walk down the street, and you try to strike up a conversation with a vendor, and the air suddenly feels completely alien.
You notice the hesitation right away.
Yeah, a quick glance over the shoulder, because you've landed on this bleeding edge of a massive historical precipice.
It's such a tense moment in time. The martial law that had literally choked the island for almost 4 decades is technically about to be lifted.
But the social muscle memory is still terrified. Yeah. You are standing in a society where just expressing an unapproved thought is dangerous.
Let alone naming the person you're actually in love with.
Right. That was still treated as this highly contagious, highly dangerous disease by the state apparatus.
It is a profoundly suffocating atmosphere to try and internalize. You're navigating a world where the state doesn't just govern your taxes.
Right. Building the roads.
Exactly. It governs your internal monologue. The very act of existing authentically is a crime.
If it deviates from the rigidly prescribed norm. Right.
Yes, it's categorized as a literal threat to national security.
Yeah.
Everything is relentlessly curated. The cadence of your speech, your posture in public.
And the secrets you're forced to withhold, even from your own family sitting across from you at the dinner table.
It's psychological warfare on a civilian level.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that hyper-vigilant, claustrophobic reality is the engine driving our entire deep dive today.
We are diving into a really fascinating piece of scholarship today.
We're looking at Elise Marie Vipastrano's comprehensive thematic analysis of the 2020 Taiwanese film, Your Name Engraved Herein.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, this is not a standard movie review.
No, not at all. We aren't here to, debate the lighting choices in a vacuum or give the movie a letter grade out of 10.
We are looking at how a coming-of-age story operates as this incredibly complex piece of historical translation.
What surface-level algorithms might just tag as a standard boys' love drama is actually doing some heavy lifting.
Our mission today is to dissect how authoritarian politics, global religious frameworks, and deeply entrenched local traditions all intersect.
And how that exact intersection violently shapes human intimacy.
This analysis essentially uses a single cultural artifact to map out an entire sociological evolution.
It's a study of how Taiwan confronted the absolute darkest era of its modern political history.
And eventually transitioned into one of the most progressive legislative environments for human rights in Asia.
We are basically looking at history written onto the bodies of 2 teenagers.
It's a heavy burden for a film to carry, but it does it brilliantly.
And to understand the weight of that history, we really have to start in the shadows. We have to look at the White Terror.
Which is the backdrop of the entire narrative.
The premise completely hinges on the exact year the story is anchored, which is 1987.
Right on the cusp of the martial law repeal.
There's this fascinating tension where the legal framework is shifting, but the psychological conditioning is completely paralyzed.
People don't just suddenly relax after 40 years of state-sponsored terror.
Exactly. So walk us through the mechanics of that era. What did that nearly 40-year stretch actually look like on the ground?
To understand the relief of 1987, you really have to measure the sheer density of the oppression that came before it.
The martial law era.
Right. Martial law was declared in Taiwan in 1949 by the Kuomintang government after they retreated from the Chinese mainland.
And that initiated the era known as the White Terror.
Yes. And this was not a period of mild censorship. It wasn't just, banning a few books.
It was severe.
It was severe, institutionalized, state-sponsored paranoia. The National Human Rights Museum archives document how the government utilized the garrison command.
That was their sprawling secret police force, right?
Exactly. And their entire job was to root out anything vaguely classified as subversion.
And subversion is one of those brilliantly terrifying bureaucratic words, isn't it?
Because it's so vague.
Right. It can mean whatever the arresting officer wants it to mean on any given Tuesday.
The historical scholarship we're looking at shows tens of thousands of people were imprisoned, tortured, or executed under that vague umbrella.
But it wasn't just happening in dark interrogation rooms, was it? The surveillance state totally relied on the general public.
It absolutely relied on the public. The authoritarian regime couldn't be everywhere at once.
They didn't have the manpower.
So they manufactured a culture where citizens policed each other. The political repression infiltrated civilian life at a granular level.
It's seeped into factory floors, neighborhood associations, and, crucially for this film, into the education system.
Schools were literally transformed into incubators for state ideology.
I want to look at how that macro terror translates into the microenvironment of a high school.
Because this is where the film places its protagonists, Jihan and Birdie.
The dynamic in their school doesn't feel like standard teenage bullying. It feels deeply systemic.
It's an institutionalized cruelty.
I kept thinking about it like an autoimmune disorder. The society has been infected with this fear of subversion, and the citizens are the white blood cells.
That's a great way to put it.
They've been hyperstimulated for 40 years to attack any perceived threat. So even when the actual infection is gone, they start attacking healthy tissue,
They start attacking their own neighbors.
their own classmates, at the very slightest sign of deviation. It's like living in a house where you've been told the walls have ears for 40 years.
And you believe it.
Even on the day you're finally allowed to step outside, you still only speak in whispers.
What's fascinating here is how highly accurate that mechanical comparison is. The societal immune system of 1987 Taiwan was engineered to neutralize anomalies.
Any anomaly.
When we look at the high school in the film, the teachers don't just act as educators.
No, they're like prison guards.
They are deputized enforcers of the state's punitive instincts. The school operates on a strict militaristic hierarchy.
But the most insidious part, as we noted, is the student body itself.
The students weaponize rumors, physical intimidation, and social ostracization. It functions as an informal mechanism of state control.
They are doing the garrison command's job for them for free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which fundamentally changes how we view the homophobia the characters experience.
Right. It isn't just organic teenage cruelty. It is a direct inheritance of state-sanctioned discipline.
When Jihan and Birdie are terrified to even acknowledge their attraction, they aren't just wrestling with normal adolescent angst.
They are exhibiting the survival instincts required in a culture where nonconformity gets you disappeared.
The school's readiness to punish a boy for his sexual identity is a perfect miniature echo of the government's readiness to punish a citizen for their political speech.
Because to the authoritarian state, deviance is just deviance.
The underlying logic is absolute conformity. If you disrupt the mandated social order through your sexual orientation,
You're viewed with the same systemic hostility as someone distributing illegal political pamphlets.
the filmmakers made a profound structural choice by setting this narrative of queer isolation exactly at the moment martial law ends.
Because they're arguing that personal liberation and political democratization are inextricably linked.
You simply cannot untangle the policing of the queer body from the political repression of the nation. They are one and the same.
I actually struggled with the next layer of this analysis, though.
Oh, really? Which part?
Well, the political oppression makes total sense given the history of the Kuomintang, but the setting of the film really threw me for a loop.
The religious setting.
Yeah. Taiwan's religious landscape is overwhelmingly dominated by Buddhism, Taoism, and incredibly rich folk traditions.
That's very true.
Yet, a definitive piece of Taiwanese historical cinema sets its story inside a Catholic boys' school. Doesn't that dilute the cultural authenticity?
I can see why you'd think that.
It felt almost imported, focusing on a global minority religion rather than the actual religious fabric of the island.
It's actually a deliberate, highly calculated friction.
Oh, really? How so?
To understand why setting this in a Catholic school is a masterstroke rather than a dilution, we have to look at the mechanics of local versus global moral frameworks.
Okay, break that down for me.
Historical scholarship, particularly the research surrounding Asian queer history, emphasizes that most indigenous religious traditions like Buddhism or Taoism did not possess a theological equivalent to the Western Abrahamic concept of sin.
Okay, so they didn't view same-sex attraction as this moral stain that damns your eternal soul.
Right, there wasn't a hell waiting for you just for being gay.
How did the local framework process it then? If it wasn't a sin, what was the issue?
They processed it through the lens of Confucianism. In a deeply traditional Confucian context, homosexuality was heavily stigmatized, but the mechanism of that stigma was entirely different.
It wasn't about the soul.
No, it was a socioeconomic and familial disruption. Confucianism is built on filial piety.
That's the immense overriding duty you owe to your parents and your ancestors.
Okay.
Yes, and the absolute primary way you fulfill that immense debt is by continuing the family lineage.
You literally owe your parents' grandchildren. It's a generational contract.
Precisely. You are part of an unbroken chain. And if you fail to marry a woman and produce an heir, you are breaking that chain.
That is a huge burden.
You are failing to provide the descendants who will, burn incense and care for the ancestors' spirits.
It's viewed as a profound failure of social and familial duty.
So the local pressure is the crushing guilt of disappointing your parents and erasing your entire lineage.
Okay, so that is the baseline pressure. That makes total sense. But then by placing these boys in a Catholic school, the narrative introduces an entirely different weapon.
It introduces the concept of eternal damnation.
Which is terrifying.
The Catholic setting overlays the political culture of the White Terror and the familial guilt of Confucianism with an absolute, rigid moral binary.
The rituals we see in the film, like the daily mass, the catechism classes, the confession booth,
those function as technologies of moral discipline.
it creates an inescapable crossfire for these kids. Usually in Western coming-of-age stories, it's just the teen versus the church.
Right, a rebellion against a single institution.
But here they are fighting a two-front war. It's the fear of eternal damnation on one side and the heavy guilt of ending a family lineage on the other.
Jiahan and Bertie are fighting a multi-front war with completely different rules of engagement.
On one side, the Confucian Buddhi says, you are a failure to your bloodline.
On the other side, the Catholic doctrine says your very soul is inherently disordered and destined for hell.
And overarching all of it, the state says, if you step out of line, we will crush you.
Let's analyze the mechanics of the confession booth scene, because it perfectly crystallizes this exact crossfire.
That scene is so intense.
Jihan enters the booth seeking solace. He is literally just trying to articulate genuine, profound love.
But the structural reality of the confession booth instantly corrupts it.
The physical grate separating them, the theological framework the priest operates within it, instantly transmutes his love into a confession of a crime.
The priest is not acting merely as an unsympathetic guy.
No, he is functioning as an agent of a global institution that historically channels queer love into absolute silence.
The priest is practically a border guard for the soul.
That is exactly what he is.
He reinforces the exact same demand for conformity that the military instructors enforce out in the courtyard.
So the state controls your public movements.
Your family controls your future obligations.
And this foreign religious doctrine is brought in to police your internal spirit.
It is an incredibly dense architecture of oppression.
And translating that dense architecture into a visual medium is where the formal elements of the film become crucial historical evidence.
Because a filmmaker can't simply rely on dialogue to convey the suffocating weight of three interlocking oppressive systems.
The cinematic form itself has to become a trap.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the analysis moves from historical theory to the actual physics of the film.
The formal analysis is brilliant. Let's look at the visual framing first.
The camera work is obsessively claustrophobic.
The cinematographer constantly traps the characters in these tight, constrained spaces.
We are dragged down these narrow, shadowy corridors. We are placed in the middle of rigid, hyper-regulated school assemblies.
Where every single student is standing at perfect attention.
Even the dormitories feel like prison cells. There's no room to breathe.
The visual confinement is a deliberate replication of the White Terror's surveillance state.
The camera rarely utilizes wide, expansive shots that might suggest, freedom or a limitless potential.
Instead, the depth of field is often shallow, and the framing mimics the gaze of an informant.
It's always watching them.
The lens focuses on the mass, the uniform, the collective obedience.
And when authority figures enter the frame, they totally dominate the composition.
They actively suppress any individual visual flair.
The lens itself demands that the characters fit in. As a viewer, you physically feel the lack of oxygen in those spaces.
But the auditory analysis, the dissection of the film's sound design, is what truly elevates this film.
The audio landscape is completely weaponized.
The sound design operates as an invisible architecture of control.
In every public space within the school, the audio track is saturated with institutional noise.
We hear the booming, resonant echo of Catholic hymns.
We hear the heavy, vibrating drone of the pipe organ.
And the rhythmic, hypnotic chanting of the liturgy.
It is absolute sonic domination. There is literally no acoustic space left for these boys to express themselves.
The institutional noise is so dense, it drowns out any possibility of an alternative thought.
The audio itself is functioning as a censor.
But notice how the soundscape radically shifts. during the intimate stolen moments.
Oh, yeah, like when Gia-han and Birdie escape to the rooftop.
Or when they're hiding in an empty classroom long after the school has shut down.
The oppressive institutional sounds are completely stripped away in those scenes.
The booming organs vanish.
And they aren't replaced by silence either. They're replaced by ambient intimacy.
You hear the rustle of the wind.
You hear the incredibly fragile sound of their breathing, the quiet shifting of their clothes.
It's brilliant because it literalizes the concept of the closet.
The loudest, most dominant frequencies in the film belong to the state and the church.
While the characters' authentic emotions are relegated to the background noise.
The audio itself is in the closet. They can only be heard when the institutions are asleep.
It is a stunning use of Foley and sound mixing to communicate a historical reality.
In those quiet, ambient pockets, the atmosphere feels warm and momentarily safe.
It overshadows the dictates of the regime, just for a moment.
But the tension lies in the inevitable return of the institution.
As a viewer, you are always bracing for the school bell to ring.
Or for that hymn to start up again, instantly crushing that fragile acoustic safety.
It makes you empathize so deeply with the sheer panic of their daily existence.
It really does. But as incredibly effective as the film is at capturing that specific claustrophobia, any rigorous historical analysis has to interrogate the omissions.
We have to ask what the camera intentionally left out.
Right. I was reading about the late 80s in Taipei, and right around 1987, the very first underground gay rights groups were actually starting to form.
Yes, there were hidden magazines circulating, secret bars operating.
So why omit that entirely? Does focusing purely on the internal trauma create a historical blind spot?
All historical narratives produced for mass consumption possess blind spots. And this analysis doesn't shy away from pointing them out.
The complete absence of the nascent 1980s LGBTQ plus activism in the film is a huge omission.
Historical archives document that the lifting of martial law slowly created fissures where civil society could begin to organize.
Hidden subcultures were tentatively seeking each other out.
So why not show it? Why keep Gia-han and Birdie in total agonizing isolation when there were whispers of a community beginning to coalesce in the very city they lived in?
Yeah, why leave them in the dark?
Because trauma is deeply myopic, and psychological isolation does not disappear the moment a law is repealed.
That makes a lot of sense.
For closeted teenagers trapped in a conservative, heavily monitored environment, the concept of political activism or community coordination was structurally inaccessible.
They lacked the fundamental vocabulary to even conceptualize a collective movement.
That linguistic barrier is fascinating.
The term tongji, the word that translates to comrade, which was brilliantly subverted and reclaimed in the 1990s as a unifying identifier for the Taiwanese queer community, that word didn't exist for them in 1987 in that context.
Without a shared lexicon, you cannot build a shared movement.
Because they had no community and no vocabulary, they were forced to internalize their persecution.
They interpreted their attraction and the immense societal punishment raining down on them as a personal moral defect.
A spiritual failing rather than a political struggle.
The omission of the broader activism in the film accurately reflects the on-the-ground reality of youth who are entirely cut off from those early fragile networks.
So the isolation is historically accurate for their specific demographic.
Yes, for high school students in a Catholic institution, it's very accurate.
But the analysis points out another, perhaps more critical, blind spot, what it terms the gendered blind spots.
And this feels like a critique of the film not as a historical document, but as a commercial product released in 2020.
It is a vital critique. The narrative lens of Your Name Engraved Herein is intensely focused on young, traditionally attractive, masculine gay men.
By centering this specific demographic, the film effectively sidelines the incredibly diverse reality of Taiwan's LGBTQ plus history.
The rich histories of lesbians, transgender individuals, and gender nonconforming activists who were instrumental in the underground movements of the era are entirely invisible in this cinematic framing.
This raises an important question about the tension between historical accuracy and commercial viability.
If you are a casual viewer and this blockbuster film is your sole entry point into Taiwanese queer history, your understanding is filtered through a highly curated commercial lens.
It prioritizes a narrative that is easily digestible.
The tragic, beautiful romance of two handsome youths. Because frankly, that is what sells tickets globally.
Does that commercial curation damage the film's value as a piece of historical evidence?
I mean, does this narrow focus make the film less historically valuable, or does it perfectly capture a very specific type of isolation?
It doesn't negate the value of the evidence, but it heavily restricts its scope.
Right. We have to take it for what it is.
We must analyze the film while remaining fully aware of the economic and cultural forces that funded its production in 2020.
Mainstream cinema historically privileges certain queer narratives over others.
Often those that are more palatable to a broader heteronormative audience.
It favors them over the messier, more intersectional realities of historical activism.
The film captures a profound truth about the isolation of 1987. But it is a singular truth, not a holistic archive.
Yet, despite those commercial filters, we cannot understate the tectonic geopolitical weight of the film's release.
The release timing is everything.
The very structure of the movie forces us to jump forward in time. We see the older Jiahan looking back at his suffocating youth from a radically transformed present.
The contrast is staggering.
Let's look at the legal landscape that allowed this film to even exist. The transition from 1987 to 2019 gives me absolute whiplash.
The acceleration of civil rights in Taiwan over those 3 decades is globally unprecedented.
The analysis highlights the pivotal milestones. First, the 2017 ruling by the Constitutional Court,
which mandated the protection of marital freedom for same-sex couples.
And that culminated in the historic May 2019 legislation,
which officially made Taiwan the very first jurisdiction in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage.
It is a paradigm shift of epic proportions.
You have a society that, in living memory, utilized secret police to terrorize citizens for merely deviating from the norm.
Evolving into a society that legally recognizes, protects, and codifies queer families into its civic infrastructure.
Which is why the analysis frames the film as a cultural act of transitional justice.
Transitional justice. Tell me more about that framing.
Typically, when we discuss transitional justice following an authoritarian collapse, we talk about truth commissions.
Or the unsealing of state archives.
And the construction of public memorials. Taiwan has engaged in all of these regarding the White Terror.
But cinema serves a different, uniquely emotional function.
This film operates as a public testimony.
It's a testimony produced from a post-equality moment, looking back on a past where queer love couldn't even be named.
The older protagonist is looking back into the dark, naming the traumas that previously had no name.
And the response from the Taiwanese public is the ultimate proof of that transition.
The box office data is incredible.
It shows this wasn't just some niche indie film that played at a few festivals. Your Name Engraved Herein became the highest-grossing domestic film in Taiwan for all of 2020.
It broke box office records across the board,
becoming the highest-grossing LGBTQ+ film in Taiwanese history.
That metric is crucial. It demonstrates that the broader Taiwanese society did not merely tolerate this narrative.
They actively embraced it.
They absorbed a story of queer trauma and romance into the very core of their national cinematic identity.
So, what does this all mean? For you listening, it's important to realize this isn't just a movie for domestic audiences, it's a geopolitical statement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Taiwan is actively utilizing its stance on human rights to signal its identity to the rest of the world.
They are willing to painfully audit their own authoritarian past through popular culture.
International human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, deeply recognize this positioning.
Taiwan is sharply defining its modern identity in direct contrast to neighboring nations.
Regimes that continue to rely on heavy censorship, state-sponsored homophobia, and authoritarian control.
By exporting a film that critiques its own history of martial law while celebrating its present reality of queer liberation, Taiwan projects itself as a progressive, liberal, democratic visionary in the region.
It completely dismantles the argument used by some conservative regimes that Asian cultural values and LGBTQ+ rights are somehow fundamentally incompatible.
People across the region can watch this film, deeply recognize the intense pressures of filial piety and religious obligation,
and see Taiwan as living proof that a society can honor its cultural roots while still advancing human rights.
The two are not mutually exclusive, they are evolving together.
It is a remarkable synthesis of past trauma and future ambition, encapsulated in a single piece of media.
It truly is. We started this deep dive by dropping into the paranoia of 1987, mapping the invisible tripwires of the White Terror.
We explored how the crushing generational weight of Confucian duty collided with the rigid dogmas of global Catholicism,
creating an inescapable psychological prison for 2 teenagers.
We looked at how the literal physics of the camera and the architecture of the sound design were manipulated to make us feel that exact claustrophobia.
And we analyzed the historical omissions, noting how the lack of vocabulary and the commercial demands of modern cinema shape what we remember and what we forget.
Before arriving at a historic legislative victory that redefined a nation's global identity.
It is a testament to the sheer world-building power of storytelling. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering question to mull over, drawing directly from our conversation about those historical blind spots.
The tension between memory and marketability.
Exactly. If a single blockbuster film, with its beautifully shot, highly marketable narrative of young masculine romance, can act as such a powerful bridge between a nation's authoritarian past and its progressive present.
How might the commercial success of this specific narrowed narrative shape the future policies and societal focus of Taiwan's LGBTQ+ movement?
That's the question. Will the diverse, unseen identities that were left out of the script, the working class organizers, the transgender pioneers, the women who built the underground networks, will they remain marginalized even in a post-equality world?
If the global market disproportionately rewards only the most palatable representations of the queer experience, what happens to the rest of the archive?
We stepped into a time machine today to see how a society healed from the traumas of 1987. But it forces you to wonder, who will the time machines of the future be built for? Whose history will we be allowed to visit next? Give that something to ponder long after this deep dive ends.